What about when the weather is normal?
Inconclusive.
So how would you disprove global warming?
You can't. That's how you know it's true.
That doesn't sound like the scientific method.
I mentioned before that there's politics too.
Yes, it does sound a lot more like the political method.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
That's from my friend John Drose's website, isn't it?
Yeah, where'd you get that?
I can't remember where I stole that.
Yeah, there's a link to it on my website, actually. There's a link to
Marita
that on my
Noon
website.
is joining us at News New Mexico. Jim Spencer, I'm Michael Swickard.
So, Marita, I want to talk a little bit more about
then we got to talk
Aubrey
Cloudcroft.
McClendon. Well, you know what? Let's take a little bunny trail. You had a very interesting weekend. Why don't you just give us a brief background?
You want the whole weekend, or you just want Cloudcroft?
Just Cloudcroft.
Just Cloudcroft. Well, I was up in Cloudcroft on Saturday for what they were calling the Otero County Tree Party. And we had a tree cutting going on up there in the Lincoln National Forest. And we had a little rally before the tree cutting, and I had the opportunity to be on the stage, to be one of the speakers at the tree party event in Cloudcroft. There was, I don't know how many hundreds of people were there, but there were multiple hundreds of people at this event in Cloudcroft, rural New Mexico, on a Saturday afternoon. Hundreds of people
So what were
showed
they
up.
upset about?
Well, what they're upset about is the way the federal government is managing the forest. As I stepped on the stage, I asked the audience, I started with questions.
Was it managing or mismanaging?
Well, mismanaging, yes. They're technically managing, but managing by mismanaged. So when I stepped on the stage, I asked the audience, and if you go to my Facebook page, you can see the pictures of this. I raised my hand, and I asked the audience, how many of you are worried about the future of America? And, of course, universally, the hundreds all raised their hand. Then I asked, how many of you think Washington doesn't have a clue? And, of course, they all raised their hands. And then I said, how many of you do not believe that Washington understands what is best for the mountains of New Mexico? And at that, many of them raised two hands, and they went up. And that really kind of encapsulates the issue that we were addressing there in Cloudcroft, that the forests are overgrown. They are mismanaged.
So they have too much fuel load.
Yes, they have too much fuel load, which creates a very hot fire. And the commissioners in Otero County decided, when they watched the Wallow Fire and the Las Conchas Fire, they said, we're facing a state of emergency here. And Cloudcroft, if the Lincoln National Forest catches on fire, the city of Cloudcroft is gone with the condition of the forests around them. This is a state of emergency. The people, the lives, the livelihood, the livestock, the economy of this region is at risk, and this is a state of emergency. And so they put together an emergency forest management plan, and they put the Forest Service on notice that they did the research, they did the legal stuff, they said we have the right to do this.
Now, what they want to do then is they don't want to clear cut like a fire would do. A fire pretty much clear cuts.
Right, it removes all spotted owl habitat. A fire does.
Yeah, a fire does, yeah. But they want to actually thin. Now, they have a model that they're using from the Mescalero Apaches, right?
Yes. The Mescalero Apache tribe does what is called uneven age management, meaning that they log selectively. And when there have been fires that have come through, such as the White Fire a few years back, when they come through on the National Forest lands, they wipe everything out. I mean, I was there over the weekend, and the area burned by the White Fire is just devastated. A lot of dead trees standing up there, but it's just gone. But when the fire hits the Mescalero land, it lays down and becomes a grass fire and becomes much more manageable because they don't have the density, they don't have the dead trees, they don't have the hot fuel that's just lying around.
Okay, we had Dr. John Fowler on talking about this, and he was talking about crown fires, that if you have a lot of density, it goes up the tree because it has so much fuel load, gets into the tops of the trees, jumps across, and actually the updraft is so incredible, it actually drags trees out of the ground and throws them ahead of the fire, so you can't do fire lines. But if you actually do this kind of thinning, it'll burn in the grasses, but it won't get up into the crowns, right?
Absolutely. And you know, what we want to do with the balance of what we've got here, Marita, is sort of tie this back, because it's the same movement that will not allow for strategic and intelligent forest management, thinning, these sort of things that absolutely make sense, that is trying to destroy the petroleum industry.
And that's exactly why I, who does energy, was speaking at a tree cutting ceremony, because the reality is we have the same enemies. And when you look a little further, those enemies, they're not only against energy development, they're against development.
Well, and I think that sadly,
and that's it, all development.
Well, they would like to pretend that human beings are not the dominant species on the planet, that somehow we can roll back the clocks of time. There's almost like this idealistic, nostalgic view of log cabins and no running water, no electricity, that sort of thing. And they're living in fantasy world. I think the estimates are, by most people who know what they're talking about, that just because of the nature of solar and wind power, it could never be more than about 15% of the total electrical production in the U.S. Is that pretty close?
Yeah, that would match the data that I'm familiar with.
So let's talk about this Marcellus Shale, because there's a lot of other shale deposits around the country, and I just want to give our listeners an idea of the economic impacts. Chesapeake Corp, which has been doing fracking wells, which is another story we're going to get to in a minute, but they are basically have 12,000 people on their payroll. They're looking for another 800 people right now, and the jobs average about $75,000 a year annually, plus very, very generous benefits. State and local taxes on the Marcellus Shale deposits, the state of Pennsylvania, estimated to be $1.4 billion next year. Could New Mexico use a really open policy towards extracting our natural resources?
Yes, they could. An interesting thing is I was at the New Mexico Mining Association convention a couple weeks ago up in Albuquerque, and I was talking with some of the guys there, and they commented on, since we have changed governors. Now, this is an example of what difference one person can make, because I've argued with some people, about our president, it doesn't make that much difference, blah, blah, blah. No, the leadership at the top, it makes a big difference. They were telling me what a difference it is under Governor Martinez than it was under Governor Richardson, because they said they want to help us. They want to work with us instead of fighting with us, and that's what they had under the Richardson administration. It was a constant battle.
So there's there's more to this economic story than just the revenue flowing to the state. There's a million, and this is just for Chesapeake alone, which there's many energy companies out there. 1 million mineral owners in 16 states have been paid $9 billion over the last 5 years.
I'm wishing they'd find oil on my land.
And $2 billion in taxes over the last 5 years. Now, we need to give people a quick history lesson, because what is at stake here is the future, not the past. The discoveries of these deposits and this new horizontal drilling technology has basically taken assets that have been under the ground for 300 million years.
This is new wealth.
That was totally non-existent. The wealth was non-existent. It was there, but it was worthless until technologies have come along so that we can now tap into these things. Now, here's my point about the environmentalists, radical people, and I want you to tell me where I'm wrong here, Marita, but here's the point. The point is that fracking, which is a technology that they use to extract more and more petroleum from the ground, has been around since 1949. Nobody ever said a word about it.
Only we didn't call it fracking.
Yeah.
What do we call it then?
Acidizing and things like that. This new word is not something we said a lot of, but anytime you have a well, you have a certain amount of, let's say it's oil, you have a certain amount of flow per day, and how much that thing goes round and round depends on how much the oil flows into the area to pump from. And so you'll see some of these wells that they only pump a little bit, and then they wait a little while, then they pump a little bit. That's because it's a
lot
slower,
of that in Southern California where I'm from.
Yeah, flow in. And so they will do something to the well to try to open that up. Now, it's triple It doesn't just have one pipe on it. It's triple piped down, so nothing down there at 2,000 feet is coming up to 60 feet where the water table is. The triple.
Well, and let me finish the point on fracking and then get your comment, because in places like Fort Worth, where the Barnett Shale deposit is, not the Marcellus Shale back in Pennsylvania, they're fracking wells within 600 feet of schools and churches.
Well, it won't have any effect.
Schools, churches, and homes,
No, it won't
600
have
feet.
any.
But what I'm getting at is I believe that what's happened is since the environmentalists, radicals, everybody wants clean air and clean water, but these radicals, they don't like fracking technology, not because it's dangerous, but because it's going to destroy their dream of a petroleum-free, natural gas-free world, right?
That is true, yes, because as we stated earlier, in general, they're anti-development. It's not just anti-energy development, it's anti-development, period. And that includes economic development.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking $5 to $7 trillion over the next 10 years that the United States and New Mexico citizens contributing to that process is going to export $5 to $7 trillion in our hard-earned dollars to states outside of the United States that tend to hate our guts. The possibility of us basically opening up getting these environmental radical lawyers out of the way, I mean, it could revolutionize the economy.
Well, the key thing you said there is the radical environmental lawyers. I made a comment in my speech up in Cloudcroft on Saturday that I had just last week met with kind of a new friend, and we went out for coffee, and he told me some of his background, and he explained to me that he said, I started out in the environmental movement. I went to get my bachelor's degree in dirt and plant sciences. I mean, how much more environmental can you get than dirt and plant sciences? And he said, I worked on some projects. He said, I have given technical witness testimony against some of your people, he said to me. And he said, but you know what? He said, they don't want a solution.
Yes, agronomy and horticulture, definitely two interesting subjects if you're into dirt and plants. We are
Glad to know that. Thank you.
News New Mexico. Marita Noon will continue. We'll be right back.